Greetings and welcome to this latest vlog, which deals with a subject that I think is really important for anybody travelling independently, and that is guidebooks. Now, as you can see, I've amassed quite a few over the years, and what I want to do is talk through a few of the guidebooks that I've used, what I think makes a good guidebook or a bad guidebook, and recommend which ones to buy or whether to buy or not. Now, the first guidebook that I ever bought was this one, and it's Berlitz Guide to Malta. I bought it in 1995. As you can see, it's full of colour pictures, very glossy, but it's not very big, and to be honest with you, this guidebook is virtually no use whatsoever. Back then I hadn't travelled much at all. It was my first time on a plane, and there weren't the amount of guidebooks available, to be fair, that there are now, and I didn't know what I was buying, so I just bought a guidebook for Malta. Yes, it gave me a bit of historical information, the pictures are nice, but realistically it's no use whatsoever for an independent traveller. It gives no accommodation listings, it gives no eating recommendations, and very little information, full stop. These are for package tourists that just want a tiny bit of background and a few souvenir pictures of their holiday. Again, not a lot of use. I won't say I've never bought a Berlitz since. I bought one more since, which was the Abu Dhabi one, because there was nothing else published on Abu Dhabi when I went there a few years ago. And you know what? This is just as bad. I might as well have not bothered. So, yeah, that's those. And there's quite a few similar kinds of guidebook to those Berlitz ones. Baedeker's, AAA, those kind. They're based on people in cars or people on package holidays. I'll say, for the independent traveller, not a lot of use. The first guidebook that I bought as an independent traveller, and which I absolutely fell in love with, which you can see by how used it is, was this, Greece Lonely Planet. Bought this one in 1996 before I went to Greece. And I just absolutely love this book. I read it in the bookshop during my lunch times before I actually bought the thing, and just imagine myself transported off to all these cool places. What do I like about it? First thing first, what I love about Lonely Planet is they are easy to navigate. Each of these is a region, so straight away I can get to the place I want so easily just by opening up. And look, I've opened up here, and look at these really clear and concise maps. I can find my way around. They've also got great listings for accommodation where they give you the price. Very easy to find anything, and I think that's the main thing. They're easy to navigate. There's also restaurant listings, which to be fair I use a bit these days, but I didn't do for years. What I also liked about them, they were written for people like me, people on a budget. I became a Lonely Planet convert, and that was only reinforced when I bought the guide to Israel and the Palestinian territories, which I use extensively, but of course I don't have now, because when I went back to Israel in 2009, I left it in a taxi. I was gutted, because that was one of my favourite guidebooks. So, I became a Lonely Planet convert, and I thought they were really good. However, not everything was perfect, as my next guidebook will show. This one was Eastern Europe on a Shoestring. I bought this because at that time there was nothing else available for Bulgaria and Romania, which was where I was going. And this guidebook covers about 10 countries in one book. Again, easy to find which country you're going to, but it's trying to do too much. And unless you're on a trip where you're just jumping from capital city to capital city, like an Interrail trip, these are useless, because once you get out into the provinces, get out into the countryside, there's nothing there. That said, they're good as an overview and really good for the capital cities. And to be fair, this was useful because I used it when I went on a trip across Europe in 2003, stopping at all the capital cities. But when I was living in Bulgaria, not a lot of use at all, because it just didn't go deep enough. So I think always beware, wary of a guidebook that's trying to cover too much. Okay, so that was that one. At the time, I experimented with some other guidebooks, and here's one. This was the Rough Guide to Belgium. I bought the Rough Guide to Belgium and the Rough Guide to the Netherlands. Why? because they were the only guides to those countries. A lot of people rave about rough guides. I have tried and tried and tried to love rough guides. I can't do it. I have to say, they just look at the text. It's really dense. It's really hard to get your way through them. The maps are okay, but what I didn't like was the accommodation listings, because the accommodation listings, they're given in general price categories rather than the exact price. Yeah, that's good in the respect that if you don't update them that often, and to be fair, these aren't as updated as often as Lonely Planets, then the prices could get out of date. But the problem is, you're looking at like a $1 sign, and you're like, well, which one's that? And you have to look up the price categories to see which one it is. It's a pain. But I think mainly, I just can't navigate this. Look, I can't find where I'm getting to easily, and the text is just too dense. It's not visual enough. Again, the information's good, the background information, but generally I'm not a rough guide kind of guy. Know plenty of people that are. So, I was firmly convinced with Lonely Planet, and it continued that way when I went on my big trip across Asia, and perhaps the most useful guidebook I ever had was this one, which was Lonely Planet China. Why? Because guidebooks always have, or most of the ones I might always have, a language section at the back. Never use them, because I either speak the language or I don't. But in China, it's very, very difficult, unless you speak Chinese, to actually pronounce Chinese words. We can try, and they just don't get what you're on about. And of course, the script is totally different. And a phrasebook became invaluable. Now, I was actually very lucky in that somebody gave me this one, which is I think it's the Japan Travel Board pocket interpreter, which has got a variety of languages, including Chinese, which was really good. But that, together with the Lonely Planet phrasebook at the back, with the Chinese characters and the Latin alphabet, was invaluable because we could point at things. And so I suppose the lesson from that is, don't buy a guidebook that doesn't have some stuff in the actual characters of the local country. You know, if you're going to an Arabic country, make sure there's some Arabic in there in the language section at least, because you might be resorting to pointing at one stage. So I was very, very happy with China, but on the same trip, later on, we then went to Russia. And Russia was where my first issue with Lonely Planet came about. Lonely Planet Russia, Ukraine and Belarus, to be fair, it does way too much than one guidebook should. You cannot cover Russia, Ukraine and Belarus, which is, you know, a huge part of the world's land surface, in one guidebook. You just can't be done. And so, again, like the Eastern Europe with on a shoestring, not good enough. But what I didn't like about this guidebook is it had started trying to tell me how to think. I'll give you an example of this. So there's a boxed section here. I quite like their boxed sections normally. They normally contain a snippet of cultural information. But this one I don't. It's called An Unholy Alliance, and it's about the mayor of Moscow, Yuri Lushkov, and his favourite architect, Zarub Tsereteli. And he built a huge statue honouring Peter the Great. And it says, the culmination of their 1990s works is the statue of Peter the Great on the Moscow River across from the Cathedral of Christ the Saviour. Impossibly ugly, ungainly, and lots of other unfavourable adjectives, the 60-metre statue allegedly depicts the Russian ruler on the prow of a stylised boat. In reality, the monstrous pile shows a strange blob of a man on an even blobbier boat, with sails that look like so many sheets hung out to dry. To be quite frank, I can make my own mind up about whether I think something looks good or not. I don't need to be told how to think. And Lonely Planet, around this time, started doing this. They started telling you, oh, this is ugly, this is beautiful. And then the must-sees crept in. You must see this site. And they give you a list of must-see sites at the beginning. And that disturbed me because I'm an independent traveller. I want to think for myself. It comes with the independent territory. I don't want to be told how to think. And also, there was other aspects as well. Probably because of the fact that they started with people my age who were backpacking, and then who got middle-aged, middle class, and richer. They were no longer kind of shoestring guides. They were, pushing some really like haute cuisine restaurants and expensive hotels. And there was less and less in for independent budget travellers. And yet this is the budget traveller guide. And so they were becoming less relevant to me. And so please, Lonely Planet, if you're listening, come back to me. Become a budget traveller guide again. Because I don't want all the expensive stuff. It's not what I'm buying you for. I think the worst example was this one. The Island Guidebook, which I bought when I went to Ireland in 2008. It's a Lonely Planet guidebook. There's some good stuff in it, but there's loads of recommendations of really expensive restaurants. It really is for the middle class, middle income traveller. And also, it gets very patronising at times. And the one that kind of stands out to me is this. It's talking about a chip shop, Leo Burdock's in Dublin. And it says, you will often hear that you haven't eaten in Dublin until you've queued in the cold for a cod and chips wrapped in paper from the city's most famous chipper. Total codswallop, of course, but there's something about sitting on the street, balancing the bag on your lap and trying to eat the chips quickly before they go cold and horrible that smacks of Dublin in a bygone age. It's nice to revisit the past, especially if you don't have to get stuck there. I just read that and I just thought that's actually quite offensive. That's quite offensive to Dublin working class culture. And I thought that was really wrong, but then I thought, you know what, Matt, maybe you're being a bit paranoid here. Maybe this is the issue, you, not the book. So I took this to an Irish friend of mine and gave it to him to read and said, what do you think of this? And he said, Matt, after I've read that, I am never buying a Lonely Planet guide again. That is appalling. That is offensive. And so I just really went off Lonely Planet at this time. But the problem is, if you go off Lonely Planet, where do you go? And my friend, the same guy that didn't like the chip shop reference, said, try Brad Guide. So the first Brad Guide that I bought was Albania in 2009. And the moment I bought this guide, I was a total convert. And today, if I can, I buy a Brad Guide for where I'm going. Why? First of all, like Lonely Planet, they're very easy to navigate. You can see the geographical sections there. The maps are clear, not as good as the Lonely Planet ones were, but then Lonely Planet got worse. Lonely Planet maps are a lot less clear and a lot more blurry these days. I think the reason is that in a lot of Southeast Asian countries, people make a living by photocopying Lonely Planets, and the newer ones are harder to photocopy. But yeah, I mean, these maps are okay. Yes, they have got the whole accommodation price code thing, which I don't like. I prefer the exact price. But at least you can find out what they mean very clearly because it's on the back of the front page. So you don't have to look around too hard. Some great recommendations for accommodation and places to go. Brilliant on cultural background. And it's never full of opinions. It's never patronising. These are written by people who are passionate about the countries. It's often a different writer for a different country, and it's often people who perhaps, have been going there for 30 years rather than professional travel guide writers. I love these guides. They are amazing. By Brad. I can't say this strong enough. And I've actually contacted Brad on several occasions. Whenever they've written back, they've been really friendly and really helpful. So yes, by Brad. The only problem with Brad is, if you have a look at mine, I've got Albania, I've got Armenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, Israel, North Korea and Ukraine. They're all quite niche destinations, and what they don't do is cover some of the more popular destinations. They tend to go for the places that other guidebooks don't reach, particularly North Korea. I mean, who else does a guidebook for North Korea? No one. Although I have to say I have a little complaint with this one because it got confiscated when I got to the border because they called it North Korea and not the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which the border guards didn't like. But hey ho, God please everyone. But yeah, So, for example, when I went to Cuba or India, I had to buy Lonely Planet. But if there is a Brad guide, and they never try to cover too much either, you know, they're really, really good. So that to me is my guidebook recommendation. So I've talked about guidebooks, but maybe the question should be these days is to whether we actually need to buy a guidebook or not. Because considering when I started travelling in the early 1990s, things have changed dramatically. And the biggest change of all has been the internet. And the best example of that is, remember the Chinese guidebook I talked about, where I used it as a phrasebook? When I went back to China last year, it wasn't half as useful as it had been then, because these days you've got mobile phones and you can translate directly on mobile phones. Also, they've got GPS positioning, so you can pick up Google Maps, and you know, there's loads of information on there about anything. So basically anywhere with the internet, which is more or less anywhere except the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, makes guidebooks in a way redundant. What's more, if you go to anywhere in Europe, or most places in Europe, we have these. And these are in your pocket guides. Now, the first in your pocket guide that I came across was back in 2009, and it was In Your Pocket Pristina. Pristina is the capital of Kosovo. Who on earth produces a guidebook to Kosovo apart from Brad? Nobody does one of Pristina on its own. And yet Pristina had its whole guidebook on its own. And if I look at these, this is Łódź in Poland. Łódź is not even a major tourist destination in Poland. Not that many people go there. So in a normal guidebook, at most it gets a couple of pages. Here it gets a whole book. And it's really detailed stuff. We've got loads of drinking and eating recommendations. We have boxed texts like in The Lonely Planets, with some cultural information. Look, here we are. Famous graduates of Łódź. Loads of accommodation stuff. It's brilliant. Yes, there's adverts in there. That's how they make the money. But these are really good, and they're free. You just pick them up from your hotels. And if you don't have any in your hotel, don't worry, because they're available electronically. So, you know, you don't need to buy anything. You've got in your pocket guides, and these are available for loads of cities across Europe. So I really do recommend, if you're going anywhere in Europe, pick one of these up. And so, do we need guidebooks? Well, I seem to have made the case there that we don't, and yet I've still got loads, and I'm still buying loads. And so the question might be as to why. Well, there's a variety of reasons. I think most of them are connected to the fact that I am of an older generation, and I'm a bit of a technophobe, and so I got used to them, and I still like having them. And I love having an actual physical book in my hands. I love it, and it's great for reasons beyond the fact that it's something I'm used to. So say, for example, I've got my guidebook to Albania, and I'm looking through this, and oh, here we are, there's Bilis. I have never been to Bilis. I will probably never go to Bilis. But you know what? I've got 10 minutes. I might read up about Bilis whilst I'm on a bus somewhere. And they're great for that. Just something you can dip into as a good read. Something particularly for the cultural and historical background. And for that, they're great because if I have people round and we're talking about somewhere, we might get one out to have a look at it together and say, oh, well, have you considered here? Have you considered there? And they might look through it and, oh, Matt, have you been to this place? Have you been to that place? And for me personally, as somebody who writes up his trips, they're great for research and reminding me of different things. Anyway, that's my thoughts about guidebooks. So I suppose my rules would be, don't go for one that tries to cover too much. Don't go for one that's all glossy photos and little information. Go for a format that you're happy with, that you're used to, that you can navigate. So that's why Lonely Planet did it for me, and also Brad Guides. My personal recommendation, if one is produced, go for Brad. If there isn't one, I normally go for Lonely Planet. Although, please, Lonely Planet, go back to what you were, not what you are now. And always have a look at things like In Your Pocket or alternatives. I'm sure there's others around the world. And don't forget that, on your mobile phone, or your computer, there's probably some very useful information. Thanks for listening. I hope it's been useful. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and visit my blog. It's Uncle Travelling Matt. Keep travelling.